Good morning, welcome to the Canadian Scene on Canadian Orthodox Broadcasting System. And we would call this program All Things Considered, except that NPR already has the title taken. But today we're actually looking at the interaction between faith and society and culture in Canada. And that's the primary focus of this particular program. And today we're going to discuss particularly with Brad Jersak, the problems facing the evangelical movement in Canada and the differences that are developing between at least two wings of the evangelical movement in Canada, partly under the influence of groups from America who are representing American republicanism in Canada, and partly under the impetus of those evangelicals who are rediscovering Matthew, 25th chapter of Matthew's Gospel and trying to put it into serious effect, looking more at our Lord Jesus Christ and his life than at Old Testament law. And we're interested to see how these developments are shaping. And together with us is Ron Dart, who's professor at the University of the Fraser Valley and also a noted Anglican scholar, particularly renowned for his work in writing about and trying to keep alive the Red Tory tradition in Canada, the tradition of commonweal. And we'll be talking with Brad and interviewing him and hearing what he has to say about the evangelical movement in Canada today. Brad, would you like to open up with expressing for us perhaps the tensions in different wings or movements within the evangelical Protestant world today?
Sure. Just by way of background, I grew up in Manitoba as a staunch Baptist with the General Baptist Conference of Canada, and they would have been very, very much what we thought was mainstream evangelical at the time. Now, as time's gone by, they would seem more and more conservative. And I was with them and was baptized as a Baptist with a real strong creedal statement about the separation of church and state, for example, but also that we were completely immersed in the whole rapture theology of the day in the 70s, especially the influence of Hal Lindsey and these kind of books that had us ready to be taken away into the sky probably by next week. That's how we felt. There was a tremendous urgency in those days to quote, get people saved, because the rapture, was any day now, and Armageddon would be any day now. So there was that element too in the preaching. Of course, also Billy Graham was virtually our pope at the time, and so you can get a sense of the call to be born again, and this was what we were bathed in. I was with the Baptists till I was about 20 years old, and then I was to join onto staff in a Mennonite church. And so again, we have a branch of the evangelical movement now, this time in British Columbia, where there was also this call to, it was an odd call. We talked separation of church and state, but also political involvement. And so one needs to understand that a little bit. I became an ordained minister with them. I still have my ordination with them, although I went on to become part of a more charismatic evangelical church for the last 12 years, but I'm no longer in leadership there. So you've got these different movements within evangelicalism. In Marcy McDonald's recent book, The Armageddon Factor, I think she does a fair job of saying you can't paint all evangelicals with this one single brush, to the point where sometimes one really needs to say, if by evangelical you mean this, yes, I would identify with that movement historically. If by evangelical you mean this, this, and this, there are a growing number of us who would say, I just can't, I guess I'm not that anymore. And we're at a point now in tension where we're saying, do we try to salvage that word, or do we just abandon it? Because you have everything from very traditional, conservative, evangelical Baptist to the wilder, charismatic, and like they don't even look similar. You also have what you were talking about, those who are very committed to sort of a Sermon on the Mount and Matthew 25 kind of social action Christian, to those who would want to take over government and have a theocracy, and then those on the other hand who would be more anarchist in leanings. So it's a very, very broad term now. It's as broad as Christian is a term almost. And I suppose that's one of the reasons why Marcy's book there was such a backlash, is because people would read things in that book and say, "You're not describing me properly." And well, that might be true, but there are a lot of wings to this critter.
Mm. One of the things that strikes us is that most of the evangelical expressions that we come in contact with are really through televangelists or something like that, and those of us who work together with other Christian groups realize that that's not the essence of the evangelical movement, and it's a little bit of what we'd like to do in this program is get a broader scope of it so that people have a more fair assessment of this particular expression of Christianity. Ron, do you have anything that you'd like to address?
I think, and just echoing Brad, is that even in the last few decades you had a great fragmentation in the evangelical world between, for example, Jim Wallace coming out of what you would see as the evangelical anarchist left, critiquing as a young man in the late 1960s, early 1970s, the evangelical commitment to the Republican way in the United States. And you've already got this fragmenting within the United States, of course, between the Wallace Sojourners tradition, the Wittenberg Door tradition, which was very critical of the alliance of the evangelical heritage, which has historically been reformed theologically, coming out of the world of Carl Henry and J.I. Packer to some degree, and there's a whole stream here, and it links itself with republicanism and to some degree on the more extreme right with Zionism. And I just brought this book along too, certainly within the Canadian context which we're discussing. In Marcy MacDonald's book, she looks at the rise of the right in Canada, certainly from the early 1990s with Preston Manning coming on, but his father, Ernest Manning, who was Premier of Alberta, and Aberhart, who was before that, wrote a book called Political Realignment, A Challenge to Thoughtful Canadians in 1967, in which he argues essentially that the evangelical tradition equals a form of American republicanism. And so this sort of tract for the Times from the evangelical right has set the agenda, certainly within Alberta, and is now spread across Canada with Harper in power in defining large elements of the evangelical right in Canada and setting the stage for Marcy MacDonald's book.